book does not contain a lap dance. Ding.
Boom, 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 literature gets a look. Legs talk about books.
Hello and welcome back to Legs Talk About Books, the monthly literature podcast where, surprise, we talk about books. I'm your host, Hardleg Joe. Joining me today, a returning co-host, not often here, Mr. Bardbreaker.
Why, hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is a true honor to be here beside the fire with Joe on this wonderful evening discussing literature.
And yeah, I guess before we get into this, I should note that you do have your own YouTube channel. We probably want to plug that real quick.
Oh, yes, YouTube channel, mine, link in the doobly-doo.
Well, this will be the first episode we've put up since I started posting on Spotify and iTunes. So there might not necessarily be a doobly-doo for people to click on.
Oh, well then in that case it's youtube.com/bardbreaker.
Yes, where he does Pokemon stuff, which is not related to literature at all, but maybe you like his voice, maybe you think he's a funny guy, go check him out. But anyway, plugs aside, we're here to talk about this month's book, which is The Ables by Jeremy Scott, who is also known as the CinemaSins guy. If you're unfamiliar with that, it's a YouTube channel where he talks about movies. And I'm not really a big fan of the channel. Bardbreaker, would you say you're a fan, or are you just kind of
Yes, I am quite a fan. I've been a fan since way back in the day when they did their first videos over, like, Amazing Spider-Man and Avengers.
Ah, the little short, 5-minute ones.
Yeah, back when it was literally just kind of, real quick sins, 3-5-minute videos. Now he does, 20-minute videos where he nitpicks shit.
Yeah.
But, that's his shtick, and it works.
Yeah, I won't necessarily go into my views on CinemaSins or whatever. I'm not sure it's that important. I don't really like his videos, needless to say, but I tried to go into this with an open mind. This was a book that you had chosen, and the last book we had read was Empress Teresa, which was notoriously terrible, just bad, awful. And I went into this I was like, it's a YouTuber book. I don't really like him, but maybe he analyzes media. Maybe he could make something really good. And I'll say this about it. It's not as bad as Empress Teresa.
That's a low bar to hurdle, though.
That is a very low bar to hurdle. I'm trying to think of, all the worst books I've read. Because I don't think it's, the worst. But it's pretty low. There's, some Goosebumps that are worse than this. It technically, I guess it's not full of errors and typos and stuff. Although there are some in here.
I did notice a couple, and when I read those, I was like, well, Joe's gonna ding that, even though it's not relevant to the book.
Yeah, well, I mean, those aren't my big complaints, but it just gives you an idea of the quality. Clearly they didn't read through it a whole bunch of times. They found there's more typos here than I'm used to seeing in a published book. But it's still, I don't know. As with always, before we get into discussing the book, we should give our spoiler-free thoughts, and you already know I have kind of a low bar, so I'm interested to see, what do you think, Bard? How would you rate this book?
So I haven't read an inordinate number of books. Most of the books I've read are Star Trek novels, but yes, it is better than Empress Teresa. But as I said, that was a low bar to hurdle, but I am sort of on the opposite side of this coin than you are. I thought the book was really good. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I actually bought it when it first came out years ago. He put up a link and he was like, hey, I wrote a book thanks to all of the viewers getting me ad revenue on this channel I'm doing. So I finally got to check this box off my bucket list. If you want to pre-order this book, go donate here. And I did that. So I got it. And I remember when I got it in the mail finally, I zipped through it because it was really good. I mean, it's not a super long book either.
It's pretty short and the font's kind of big.
Yeah, it's 360 pages or something.
What I'm curious about, would you consider this a young adult novel? Do you think this is for kids and teenagers and stuff?
So we classify it as a science fiction book where I work that sells books. You can put it there. I would probably say, yeah, you could make an argument for young adult or, teen fiction. That would fit.
'Cause that's what this feels like more to me. as someone who reads a lot, as someone who's done a lot of like science fiction and is into world building and stuff, a lot of the concepts here don't really do it for me. They don't really come together. They feel very basic in a lot of ways. And I'm like, I could see how maybe like a teenager, or I guess if you haven't read a whole lot, I don't know. There's also, I don't want to insult you because you are a smart guy and you do watch a lot of like Star Trek and stuff, so you do know a good story when you see one. But it just, to me, there's 4 things I look for, like in art in general, whether it's a book or a movie, a game, any of those things, there's 4 things I look for. Craftsmanship. Is it really technically well written? Or in the case of like a movie, is it really like aesthetically shot? Does it have really good shot composition and stuff? Is it beautiful? And I would say, no, not really. It's kind of plainly written. Would you agree with that? It's not like a masterpiece of prose.
No, it's not a masterpiece. Like, as much as I like the book, in 200 years, we're not going to put this on the classic shelf with Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Victor Hugo by any means.
Again, I should note that like all of these 4 points, a book doesn't have to have all 4 points to be good. It just has to have one of these 4. Obviously, something like an action story probably isn't trying to do that. It's trying to just get across like their ideas very plainly. But yeah, so there's craftsmanship. There's originality. Does it present some really cool, unique ideas that I could really like sink my teeth into, something to ponder? And I think a lot of this just kind of rings like shonen superhero story. It's like a bunch of kids with superpowers go into a school, and they even have like a simulation where they go and pretend to fight crime and stuff. Like, it's very standard, very stereotypical in that regard.
So I don't watch a lot of anime or read a lot of manga, so unless this is something that gets done a lot in those types of works, I personally was not aware of any real, yeah, you've got, like, things in the comics like X-Men where they have,
superheroes at a school.
They go to a school with superheroes and they have, the danger room and stuff, but
or like Sky High, that Disney movie about the kids.
I forgot about Sky High, yeah, I always forget about that movie. Everybody loves it. I haven't seen that in forever.
I feel like there's a little bit more American ones. I just can't think of any. Maybe it's not as much of an American trope as I thought. But I could have swore that like the idea of superpowered people going to like a training school to learn how to do their superpowers, like it feels really like I've seen this a million times before.
It's like, yeah, I mean, you could argue that was from the X-Men, but I don't think there really wasn't a lot of that in the book. There wasn't a lot of like descriptions of the learning process where it really wasn't a focus on them, like...
Yeah.
At least not in the school sense. Like, a lot of it was the kids who were all disabled learning their powers together.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't like they were in, like, here's I-Beam 101, the general physics of levitation. Like, there wasn't anything like that.
Which kind of seemed weird to me, because they were going to school specifically, like a specific superhero school, but it didn't seem like they had any specific lessons, except for they had like a history, the secret history of the superheroes.
True, but...
Kind of a missed opportunity, I feel like.
Yes, but they are also, and this will tie into like one of the complaints you have later, is that they were all in like the special ed class.
Yeah.
And so I feel like when you're in a special ed class, your lessons aren't going to be the same lessons that everybody else is learning.
Yeah.
And you probably, don't go to every class, because maybe in the high school, like in a normal high school, you have a teacher for each subject. But the special ed kids, they stay in their special ed room for the whole day, which is what happened in this book with the kids.
Yeah.
Who are all disabled, So, maybe there is more to the like, diversified lessons and superhero education that we don't see, because these kids aren't set up in a way where they're going to get that experience because of their disabilities.
Possibly. But either way, my point is, like, I didn't think it would take me this long to go after these 4 points, my apology. But yeah, the craftsmanship, nothing special. Originality, nothing I haven't seen before. Like, utility is what I call it, which is, does it teach me anything about myself and the world? Is this like Slaughterhouse 5 that's about war and passion, or what's that one book that I hate? Lord of the Flies, where it's about human nature or something like that. Like, does this really have an overarching moral or themes? And I can't really think of anything unless it's just like, friendship is good.
I don't know that everything necessarily has to teach a moral lesson. Like,
Oh yeah.
I don't know that there necessarily has to be a deeper meaning to things. Like, that was actually one of my things. I don't remember if we ever mentioned this in the Teresa video or not, but I know I've mentioned it in discussions before where it's like, I don't know if there always has to be a literary analysis that goes deeper. You know, they'll ask you in like English class, so Nicholas Gatsby looked across the lake at that green light every night. What do you think F. Scott Fitzgerald meant by looking at a green light? I'm like, maybe the neighbor just had a green light bulb. Why does there have to be a deeper meaning to it?
Well, see, usually the thing that people use the example of is the curtains are blue. You know, guy enters a room and they talk about the blue curtains, and then the teacher's like, why are the curtains blue? And the teacher will tell you that there's this deeper meaning, and it's like, maybe the curtains were just fucking blue. And I'll actually defend the teacher on that one, as someone who's like written something before. Whenever someone enters a room, you don't describe like every single part of that room. You have to tell people the important things for them to continue the story. They can run from room to room to room, and if there's nothing important, that's all you have to say is they went from room to room. But if they take a moment to say, also, there are curtains here and they're blue, then they added that point for a reason. A good author only includes stuff that has a reason to be there. It's not like a movie where, like, yeah, in a movie, if you're watching a scene and there are blue curtains, it might be just because they needed something on the set and the set is blue. But in a book, everything's there because they had to put it there.
So that kind of leads me to a point that I was going to use against one of your complaints that you've mentioned.
Well,
you were like,
does it involve spoilers? Because we're still not at the spoiler part.
Not
yet.
really. Not really. One of your complaints was just that, like, they don't explain how the superheroes get paid in life.
Yeah.
And it's... I kind of feel that's sort of in that same ballpark, though. Like, yes, they don't explain it, but would a passage in there explaining, like, the free point tax code, and, you know, distribution of wealth to the superheroes, would that have in some way changed the general story of the thing? And I don't think it was. They definitely don't ignore money. You know, they mention, you know...
Bentley's dad is rich.
Yeah, he mentions Bentley's dad is rich. What the hell's this kid's...
Somehow.
The main kid, I'm drawing a blank.
Philip.
God, I don't know how I forgot that. He mentions he gets an allowance, you know, so they obviously put references. There's a bank, a jewelry store. So there obviously is a system of commerce in place. You know, Jeremy just didn't go into great detail, and
look at
you know, you're just speaking there like, well, there has to be a point to that. I was like, well, yeah, but if he had put that in there, and then by the end of the book, would you be complaining if he's like, well, he went to all this detail explaining the currency of Freepoint and how they get it, but then it wasn't relevant, so that was just a wasted time. Like, I feel like there's in writing especially, there's a line between world building and scene setting and the Chekhov's gun notion, like the blue curtains.
Yeah.
You know, you can give details, but giving too much detail is a problem, you know? If you put a gun in the setting
and it doesn't
describe
go off, then why have you described it?
Yeah, why did you describe the gun if it wasn't relevant?
Yeah.
If it's not relevant, don't put it in there.
Well, here's what I would say about that point. It's relevant to know how they make money because they're literally going to school to do this as a job. And there's no indication, like, the superheroes are a secret society who go out, they're not part of the US government, and no one knows that they're doing this, and they go out and they fight crimes and they save people. But then they also have this huge city where they can have a big industrial school and have simulations, and there are rich people even who make more money than other people. And it's like, how does this all function? How am I supposed to get invested into him doing his job when I don't know what his job is? Or why he should want to do it other than just like, who doesn't want to be a superhero?
Would you say Harry Potter has that same flaw?
I haven't read Harry Potter, so I don't know.
Because then for the people in the audience, maybe they can expand on that point.
Yeah.
Like, there's a system of commerce in the Harry Potter world, like the wizarding world. They have their own currency, their own coins and whatnot, and there are jobs, you know, some people run stores in the Harry Potter world, but they don't really go into detail with, like, okay, the system of commerce doesn't really get a whole lot flushed out. It's just established, like, Harry has a lot of money that his parents left him, and then there are poor wizards, like the Weasleys, who are dirt poor, and the Malfoys, who are really rich.
Yeah.
But they don't go into detail, like, well, how did the Malfoys get all this money? Like,
well, the thing
is there a wizarding minimum wage that needs to be raised so the Weasleys can get out of poverty? Like, they don't go into all those details.
Well, that's the thing, is that, like, being a wizard isn't a profession, from what I understand. Like, you go back to the regular world and you be a wizard in secret, and you have these powers, but you're not using, like, your job. Like, I assume that, what's Harry's friend's name again?
Ron Weasley?
Ron. I assume Ron's parents do something other than be wizards. Like, they have day jobs, and then they just also happen to be magical people in secret.
No, like, the wizards have their own jobs. Like, Ron's dad works for the Ministry of Magic in the Department of Muggle Affairs, I think it is.
Oh, okay.
So it's described, he has, like, an obsession with, like, Muggle artifacts, and, like, in one of the movies, he's like, so tell me, Harry, what is the exact purpose of a rubber duck? And so it's like the Muggle affairs or Muggle artifact, misuse of Muggle artifacts, I think, is the actual department that he's part of.
Yeah. Well, I assume, I don't know, it's hard to say about Harry Potter, but I feel like with their world that they have some sort of, you know, they can make gold or they can help people out to get money. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I might have that same complaint about Harry Potter.
You might then. I was kind of hoping you had seen Harry Potter, because I literally just thought of that as we got here. I'm like, well, wait a minute, Harry Potter's kind of that same...
I've avoided it because I don't like magic, but yeah, strangely. But it's one of those things where, you know, I'm not... You talk about, like, would it have been better if they spent all this time on it? And I didn't want them to spend all this time on it. I just wanted to, like, a throwaway line or something to mention, like, what is this leading to? How can you, like, do they have secret identities? Do they do day jobs? Do they get, like, money from the government? Do they, like, take, like, if someone's robbing a bank and they stop that robbery, do they take some of their money for themselves? Like, how can they... Like, I feel like I need to know this to understand the society that this kid is in, but it's just like, no, it's regular society, but you can fight crime for a living, and somehow you get paid for it by someone, presumably. Like, I don't know who. You don't go to an office or anything. Someone just has the money to pay you.
Well, maybe he flushes that out more in the second book that I ordered.
Possibly.
And he's apparently got a third book that's coming out like this week or something, like within the next couple of weeks, because I didn't realize he had written a second and then a third one.
Yeah.
So I will read those. I know you wouldn't care. You could care less about them, but
yeah, I'll just look up the.
I will read them, and if he does address, you know, the Superhero Taxation Redistribution Act of, you know, 1432, I will let you know.
Okay, but yeah, we got way off topic, but people like the tangents. But just going back to the four things I look for: the craftsmanship, mediocre; utility, there really isn't one. It's more meant to be like an action story. It's not a very original action story. And then the last thing is sort of like heart. Does it make you feel emotions? Like, you can have a really good story that doesn't have any of those other things, but if you've got like a hero fighting against evil and you're really invested in their battle or whatever, like, that can be enough to make an enjoyable movie or TV show or book or whatever. If you have a mystery, like a Sherlock Holmes, sometimes that's enough to get you invested, and the rest of the stuff doesn't really matter. But even on this one, like, I really don't get, like, the emotional core. It's hard to go into without going into spoilers.
I know, I was gonna say, you're teetering on the spoilery part of this.
Yeah. But there's just never a time when I really felt like the characters, I didn't really identify with them, because they just feel really boilerplate, kind of stereotypical. There's a, like, sarcastic one and the smart one, and then the generic main character who's just like, I'm a good guy, I like to do good things because I'm good. I like superheroes. Like, I don't know. I just felt like even in a story like Star Wars, like the original trilogy, where you have, like, Luke, who's a very generic person, he still has sort of, like, these dreams and ambitions that go a little bit farther than Philip does. And I guess that's maybe the part where you might disagree with me. Maybe that's where everyone disagrees with me, but I couldn't get invested in, like, anything that was happening, really.
You didn't get invested in, like, Philip discovering his powers and learning to control them and grow them. Like, he starts out, like, moving his phone, and then eventually, like, can just freeze multiple people with it. And
I guess we're getting into spoilers now.
that wasn't much of a spoiler, but if you want to go into spoilers...
We should go ahead and get into spoilers, so I'll just leave it at that. Like, for me, there's 4 things that a book can do to impress me. This didn't do any of them. I would only recommend it if you're, like, a kid and you like superhero stuff.
Yay! Superhero! Yay!
That's my opinion, at least. Maybe if you've listened to the other episodes, you know whether or not my opinion aligns with yours. Bard, you can go ahead and get your thing. Who would you recommend this to?
Or
maybe if you don't want to give it to a recommendation to a specific type of people, maybe, like, how would you rate it? Out of 5 stars or 10 stars? I don't know what your rating system is for stuff, if you even have one.
Out of 16.5 Blorgaboos, I give 13 Blorgaboos. As far as where I'd rate it, I mean, out of 5, I'd say a good solid 4.
All right.
So, 80%, if you will. Like, it's not A work, I don't think, but it's a good solid B+, A
solid B. It's not going to change your world, but you had fun with it.
Exactly. Like, yeah, like you're not going to put this up there next to, Shakespeare and all that, but I enjoyed it.
That's the thing to me. To me, a B be like the first Spider-Man movie. Where it's like, yeah, I'm not going to learn a whole bunch, but it had this theme of, like, great power, great responsibility, where stuff happens, and you feel really invested about it, and there's some cool action-y fights, and things happen, and at the end you leave the theater like, yeah, that was pretty nice. And this is below that. This is C, maybe D tier. It's not F tier. It still succeeds. I still remember who the characters are.
Well, that's again, something at least.
I try not to grade things like that. Again, for me, the grade is like these 4 points, and usually each reader, I find, has 1 point that they, like, really enjoy more than others. Obviously, I like the utility, like when something has something to say. You're more of like a heart guy, where you really like the compelling characters and stuff. And there's some people who are just, like, originality snobs, and all they care about is, like, what can you do that's new and different and experimental and stuff.
You didn't think disabled teenagers learning about their superpowers was original?
Not particularly. The heroes with disability angle, it has potential, it is an original concept, but it feels like a gimmick to me. Because I feel like if you're going to do that, there's 2 ways you can do the story. You can either make it a story specifically about disabled people and the struggles they go through in order to, like, teach the audience a little bit something about disabled people. Maybe you learn about the blind experience, or you come to empathize with what it's like to be blind. Or you could do sort of like the opposite, which is, like, include a character with disabilities, and then just normalize it by not making a big deal out of it. Just be like, yeah, these are normal people like everyone else, and they can do the same jobs that we can, and it's not a big deal. And I feel like the book kind of tries to have it both ways, and that's what makes it fail. Like, the Ables are separated from society. They're treated differently because of their disabilities, but it's in a really completely superficial way. It's unrealistic to how actual disabled people are treated, because you have a main character who's blind, another one who's confined to a wheelchair, a kid with asthma, and a kid with Down syndrome, and they're all in the same special ed class. As though, like, not having your legs work and having Down syndrome require the same education. Like, those kind of people aren't subject to the same struggles. It's all very, very different. So it feels like the discrimination against them as a result feels really superficial, because they're not angry at them for their specific disabilities. They're just angry because they're disabled in general.
So I think, like, I get that point, but I think your comparison to, like, how we treat actual disabled people and special needs children in, like, the real world isn't quite on par. Because yes, in a real school setting, like in the real world, if you had a kid in a wheelchair,
he would just go to regular class.
Most likely, assuming he's not mentally handicapped in any way, he's just going to go to regular class and he just won't sit at the desk.
Yeah.
But I think the reason all of these kids were lumped together in the Miss Crouch's class was because their disabilities, impact their superpowers. Like, Philip has telekinesis, but he's blind, and, a blind telekinetic could, bring the building down if he can't see what he's doing.
See, that makes sense in the case of Philip, or in the case of, I forget his name, the kid with asthma. It's not James.
Yeah, no, James was the teleporter.
Yeah.
Who was also blind.
Yeah, there were two blind kids.
Yeah. Was it Freddy?
No, it wasn't Freddy. That's not really important. The point is, he has asthma, his power's to grow giant, but because of his asthma, whenever he grows giant, he can't really, breathe. He basically has an asthma attack when his lungs get huge, so he can only stay there for, a second, and then he has to shrink back down. And so it's I understand that there's, a special class for kids who have superpowers, but can't use them properly because of their disability. But the guy in the wheelchair is telepathic. His ability to read people's minds is unaffected by his inability to walk. I think
that's a fair point.
Or Bentley is the most. Because Bentley's superpower is that he's super intelligent. And he has cerebral palsy, but it's a very mild form of it where they talk about him climbing trees and stuff. And I've looked up cerebral palsy, and there's some very severe versions of it where it comes with mental faculties, or there's parts where you're essentially paralyzed because your muscles just do not work. But he has to use crutches, but he can still get around fairly well. And he's more intelligent than most other people. There's no reason why he shouldn't be in a regular class. Or if nothing else, they talk about at the beginning, they make a distinction between the physical powers, growing big, and the mental powers, being super good at math. And it's I feel like those would be completely separate classes. You wouldn't even, if it wouldn't really matter whether or not he had cerebral palsy. If his whole thing is to be super intelligent, you put him with the other super intelligent kids and start teaching them at an advanced rate. It's just really weird.
No, you could make that point. That's, I can get behind that argument for, his character and his ability and disability.
Yeah.
And maybe that is a flaw with Jeremy's writing, that he's trying to write based off what he knows, and so maybe he's, as a human in the real world, he's familiar with special education. He would assume that if you have cerebral palsy, you're almost certainly going to be in a special care class of some kind.
Yeah, I was trying to do research on this to find out how realistic this was, but it really depends on place to place. But at least me personally, I went to high school, and there was a blind kid who went to regular classes with everyone else, and he just got sheets in Braille. He had a little computer that let him type out things in Braille. And otherwise he went to all the normal classes and everything. A lot of these disabilities, I guess it really depends on your area, but I don't feel as though these people would be super separated. Or I was talking to my dad, and he's in his 60s now, and he's yeah, we had kids in my school who had polio, and they couldn't walk, but they still went to regular classes and stuff. He's we had a kid who had what we call now autism. He used a much harsher word for it, but he's yeah, he still went to the class with the rest of us. At least up until high school, and then he sort of had his own career path there. But yeah, I think that's the thing that got me about it, was that Jeremy made this point of, he put all the disabled kids in one class, and I thought that was going to be because, oh, it's not realistic, but he's trying to say something about how all these vastly different people are looked at by society in the same way. Except he doesn't really follow through with that theme in the end. He doesn't really, I guess, yeah, that's at the end he doesn't say anything about being disabled, other than I guess you shouldn't discount Donnie.
Yeah.
Although I saw that twist coming from like a mile away, and it's kind of like Donnie ex Machina. But I mean, I guess that's another thing about this. I feel like this story would have been 10 times better if he had told it from anyone else's perspective except for Phillips. Like, man, if we could have gotten some insight from Bentley, the super intelligent guy, and he could describe everything in much better detail, like, that would be really cool. Or if you had Henry, the wheelchair-bound kid, who could literally read people's minds and give you insight into what all the characters were thinking. Or hell, you could even have chapters from Donnie's perspective, and that would give you some really unique, writing possibilities. When you talk about, like, what does this book do that hasn't been done in another book? I've never seen another book come from a character with Down syndrome. If he had done, like, some research and could actually, like, do a first-person narrative as Donnie, like, that could have been really interesting and really exciting. But he specifically chooses the blind kid. And then there's this prologue beforehand where he's like, look, I'm blind, so I can't really describe things all that well, so...
Okay, but you know the shot I'm gonna take with that, though. And, that's exactly the same thing you did with your narration in Legend of Lefty. You have your narrator at the beginning talking about this, and then at random points throughout your story, he pulls you out of the dialogue, out of the story, to just be like, and then Lefty went in here with these people, and as I was not there to see it, I cannot tell you what Lefty said to them. And it's just, it's jarring when you have your narrator pull you out of the story to remind you that it's a narration, that you don't know all the details. Because a narrator is supposed to be all-knowing as a narrator, so it's like, with Philip...
Not necessarily.
He jars that at the very beginning, like in literally the first sentence in the prologue. He gets that out of the way. He's like, there's going to be things that maybe I don't describe well enough. And you could argue maybe that's a way to cover up lazy writing, because that was the same thing I said with you when I was critiquing Lefty. I said, this just screams to me like you didn't know how to fill this conversation. You didn't know what to have Lefty say or what people could have said to him to make this scene work. You just knew where you wanted to go. So you did and one thing led to another, trick that lazy authors do.
Yeah.
And so
two things I would say. One, some of those in that, like, you've read Legend of Lefty, which is my book, by the way, people, I've been working on one. Like, what you read was the first draft, and when I go back, I may change a lot of those. Because I think that is a valid criticism. But the other thing is the theme, kind of Lefty, which I guess a little bit of spoilers for this, is that the character telling the story, as the story goes on, he loses control of his friend's life, and they become more distant. So, having Lefty go off and do stuff, and he's like, I honestly don't know what happened, and it upsets me that Lefty wouldn't tell me. That's, like, part of the point of the story, is that that's happening, and if you're frustrated with not knowing it, then you're feeling the same emotions as the narrator, who is similarly left out of the loop. With Philip, it's like, they say he's blind, and they talk about how he doesn't describe things very well, but then, depending on what the scene is like, sometimes he does describe things very well, and so it's like, it feels more like he's covering for lazy writing than doing anything thematic, because half the time it doesn't even feel like he's blind.
Now, could you make the argument, though, that maybe that's the point? That, like, the overall point is that eventually, like, you kind of forget that they are disabled, because, they've grown past their disabilities.
Yeah. This goes back to the point I made a few minutes ago about, like, there's two ways that you could do this. You could try to teach me about disabilities, or you could try to make me see past their disabilities. So, like, half the time he reminds you and half the time he glosses over it. I feel like he should have stuck to one or the other. But, moving on. There was one other point we kind of touched on a little bit at the beginning, where I talked about, the heart of the story. And sort of, like, getting invested in the character, and Philip's struggles. And you were like, we don't want to talk about that because it goes into spoilers territory, sort of like what happens to his mom, I assume?
Yeah, that was the situation I was referring to, yes.
Yeah, so was that very, did that hit really emotionally hard for you?
I mean, I didn't sit there and start crying about it when I read it. Now, I don't remember my emotions the very first time I read it, when I got to that part. He put her in a coma. Like, she didn't have much part in the story, and then she gets into a coma relatively early on, and then later the bad guy kills her. And I'm just kind of like, well, we were, like, emotional, like, oh, she's in a coma, is what's going to happen? And then she just dies later. I'm just like, okay, well, that was kind of a natural ending to her being in a coma. You should have just killed her immediately.
Again, it's a missed opportunity. I feel like you could have done something with the feeling of, like, being in an unknown spot, where something could happen or something couldn't happen and you're unsure, and sometimes that's worse than knowing for sure. Like, I'm not sure how many relationships you've been in, but I've been with some women where we start a relationship and then, like, 6 months in or something, it's like we're barely talking to each other. And it's like, if she just broke up with me, I would feel fine. But being in this weird position where I'm not sure if we're still dating or if she even likes me anymore, but I also don't want to, like, break things off if there's still a chance. I could see how you would get that same sort of feeling from someone being in a coma and not knowing if they're going to live or die. And just... But he doesn't really handle it that way. It's just sort of like, he feels like he loses her when she goes into a coma, and then he feels even worse when she dies.
And then he also goes through it really quick too, like,
yeah,
she's dead, she's dead, Jim, and then it just time jumps a bit, and he's like, it's been a few weeks since Mom died.
There's one chapter of him being depressed, and then his teacher's just like, you need to stop being so selfish and brush it off and get back to work. And he goes, okay.
Because everybody deals with death, And it was like, I get that the teacher's point and stuff, but like,
yeah,
Philip really felt like it was his fault. So I feel like if you're of the mindset it is your fault, and it kind of was, you're entitled to be mopey and more upset than if it had just, happened.
I don't know, I've been reading reviews of this, trying to find other people who got the same, like, points that I did. I found, like, a couple, but most of them are, like, overwhelmingly positive. But they're also overwhelmingly positive in, like, a very, like, good book, Jeremy, I like it, no lap dance, ding. They're not very specific. But I did remember reading one very angry review where they're like, that's not how depression works, you can't just yell at someone to get better and they get better.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can kind of see both points, though. Like, that is a good lesson to give, like, that you have to move on. Maybe it's not realistic, but it kind of leads to the feeling of this being more like a kid's book or something. Something kids who, like, lose a parent, like, you do have to move on eventually. You can't just stay mopey forever. I'm willing to give it a pass on that. But yeah, it's just, I guess, I don't know. Maybe it's just because my perspective. It's interesting that you said it was kind of Philip's fault that his mom got killed. Because I've always been this very adamantly, like, if someone else caused the problem, then they're 100% at fault. Like, Finch didn't have to kill his mom at all.
Well, no, you're right. Like, Finch is the one who did it. But I think, you can Obi-Wan Kenobi this and say, so what I told you was true from a certain point of view. And so you can understand Philip's mopiness because Philip will think it's his fault, and from his point of view it is, because he called his mom out to the field, with his, emergency beacon, and she teleported out to him because that was her power, and then Finch, put they call it a no power zone, but he put a power canceling field on her so she couldn't teleport back out. And then, like...
used an oddly specific power that detaches her mind from her brain and put her in a coma.
Yeah, but then, like, her mind is just, like, floating out there in the void, but, like, he could put her back at any time, or he could kill her at any time. And then later, Philip has the button again to call another teleporter, and his dad out to the hospital, and he presses it, and Finch is like, I wish you hadn't done that, and then he kills his mom, so it's like... Philip could definitely look at that and say, you know what? If I hadn't called her to the field, she'd still be here. If I hadn't called my dad and this other teleporter again, a second time, she'd still be here.
Possibly. Again, you're bringing up this thing that's like, I feel like a better book might have had something to say about, like, learning to fight yourself instead of calling other people in.
Yeah.
Because, like, other people only get hurt when you bring them into your battles. Like, that's not necessarily a message I agree with, but it would have been a cool theme if, like, then in the final battle with Finch, he had the ability to call people, and he's like, no, I'm gonna do this myself. But it didn't really come back up or anything. Just sort of faded off. Which, speaking of Finch, you said was that the twist that you liked? Because I think you said you liked the twist at the end.
I remember. I remember how I felt when I read that the first time years ago. Because this book is actually like 7 years old. This came out in like 2013. Yeah, because I have my launch copy. But I remember with the twist with Finch, and maybe this was, 23-year-old me still being dumb, but like I didn't necessarily see that twist coming. Yeah, they set up early in the book that Philip's grandfather died.
He got hit in the face with lightning.
Yeah, the cover story they'd always told Phil growing up was that he was killed in a car accident. Which, hey, that was the same, now that I think about it, that's the same cover story they told Harry growing up, that his parents were killed in a car crash. But then it gets revealed later that Philip's grandfather, Thomas is his name, so it's revealed that Thomas was betrayed by, like, his partner on the whatever they would call them, the superhero police force.
Yeah.
And so it's going through this book, it's this shadowy figure Finch shows up and he's doing, evildoer things throughout the town.
But for some reason, he's not attacking Philip.
Yeah, he's not attacking Philip or his friends. He's just like, I like you. And then he, like, leaves.
I've got plans for you.
Yeah, he's
boy,
like, there's more. He's like, yeah, there's more to you to come. I'll be back.
Way. Which, to be fair, like, I did not mark those things down as plot points because I'm like, that he's gonna be smarter than this. There's going to be a reason. He's not gonna be just like, I'm crazy and I like to play games. Like, there's gonna be something. I remember there's a point where they know it's someone in, like, a specific photo. Mm-hmm. And they're going through, and they're like, well, the only people it could be are, like, these 3 people, and one is your grandfather, but it can't be him because he's dead. I was like, I wouldn't put it... That, like, his big defining feature of Finch is that he has a scar going down the middle of his face where it looks as though his head was split in half and then glued back together.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, yeah, I could imagine that from Lightning. I don't know how he survived it. Much less escaped secretly, but, like, as soon as it hit that point, I was like, oh, okay, it's his grandpa, and that's why he's not killing him and everything. He wants him to be, like, evil, or he thinks he's special or something.
Yeah, I just remember when I first read the book years ago, I didn't see that coming at all, and I was just like, oh, I read it as, like, hey, they made a point to say the grandfather's dead, he's dead, like, you don't just surprise...
you don't just surprise people, but they did.
And I had a vague recollection of that when I went back and reread it, because I was like, there's a reveal in this book, but I don't remember what it is.
There's 3 at the end.
Yeah, and I'm like, somebody is something.
Everybody's something, man.
Well, yeah, there's another big one at the end, which I had completely forgotten about that one. But yeah, and I was just like, Finch is somebody important, right? And I'm sitting there reading this, and I'm like, Finch is his grandfather, if I remember right. And then I get to the point, and he's like, yeah, Thomas?
It's me.
Yeah, it's like, I'm your grandfather. But
and it's like, the thing about that is, like, well, I guess it wasn't unexpected for me, but I could see how it would be an unexpected twist. But it's like, it doesn't really mean anything that it's his grandfather, because he never knew his grandfather. And it's not like, when you find out that Anakin is Darth Vader, where Luke at least had that story where they're like, oh yes, your father was a Jedi Knight, but he was a great and powerful man, but Darth Vader killed him. Like, here it's just like, oh no, he was a great guy and he died. And then when it turns out he's evil, it's like, wait, what? What is it? Why are you evil? We don't really find out, like, a super good explanation for why he was good in the first place.
Now that I'll give you, because they don't really go into that. They just, like, they talk about how, like, we could all see you were turning bad and getting corrupt with power, and so we knew we knew something was up, but they don't really go into much detail on that. They're just like, yeah, we could see you were getting bad, Thomas, so...
His partner who betrayed him is one of the heroes whose power is to cancel out other people's powers. And he canceled out Thomas's power right as that guy threw a lightning bolt at him. Which seems like a really weird time to, like, you know, if you think your friend's turning evil, don't do it in the middle of a life or death battle against a guy who could throw lightning. Like,
True.
maybe come to him after the fact or something. I don't know. I feel like there's a more interesting story there. You'll have to let me know if they ever go back to that in the future ones. Because I felt like that would be a much more interesting story to hear than the one about Philip.
Well, I feel like they're gonna do that because they Finch gets away. Like, they don't close the Finch story at all. Like, he just...
Which was also weird because he specifically says, like, if you're not... The whole thing is he thinks that his grandson is the special.
Yeah, the second coming of superhero Jesus, basically. The one who has
all the powers.
Who has all the powers of every superhero rolled into one person, just yet untapped.
Yeah. And so he's like, I'm gonna blow up a bomb, and that's gonna awaken your inner Sharingan, and if it doesn't, then I don't want to live in this world anymore, so I'm just gonna let myself get blown up by the bomb. And then he activates the bomb, and then Philip obviously can't do anything, because he's not the special. And he's like, I'm very disappointed. And then he leaves, and it's like, I thought you wanted to get blown up! You miss Donnie coming in and saving the day, which I guess is another split.
Yeah, that was the one I forgot completely about, and then it just happened at the end, and I'm like, oh, okay.
I kind of figured that as soon as they started talking about the second coming, because they mentioned specifically that, like, because he has Down syndrome, his DNA is different, so they can't exactly tell his power. It's a mystery.
Right, well, like, see, and I remember rereading it, the second time, and I remember having those same kind of thought process, because that's the same play they made in Guardians of the Galaxy, where they said, Peter Quill, Star-Lord, your DNA is half human and half something that we've never seen before. We can't explain it. And then it turns out he's a Celestial and has all this cosmic power that he didn't know about till he met his dad. And it's sort of the same stuff that they did with, Jeremy did in his book. But yeah. I think his book was actually first. I think that came out before Guardians of the Galaxy. Because
I'm also not sure if it's he was hinting at something. But I always found it weird. Halfway through the book, Donnie shows his power for the first time, and it's super speed. Mm-hmm. They talk about him going really fast, but they also talk him as like a blue blur of light. And I'm like, why does moving fast make you blue? I feel like there's something more going on than super speed, but they never brought it up. I'm really disappointed. I mean, I guess, I don't know, did you have any other points, or can I get to like my nitpicks?
Oh, let's see. We hit Finch, we hit the mom, we hit...
I mean, I guess the only other twist at the end was Chad. If you even want to count that a twist.
Chad. Who was Chad? Oh, yeah, Chad. Mm-hmm.
Who was Chad? The guy who betrayed everyone? You don't remember that part?
I do.
He was a literal Chad?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a twist that, I don't know, that one could go either way. Like, they hint at it early. It's like, I didn't know why he was suddenly being nice to me. Does getting your arm cut off make you not a bully anymore? Like,
I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, that was the only twist that I didn't really see coming. Mm-hmm. I kind of had a feeling that maybe he was up to something, because a bunch of weird stuff started happening around him. He kind of like seemed to go off and like, oh, I had to go to the other side of the thing, and the other guys got caught while I was there. It's like, oh, good job.
Yeah, or then like when they're in that super sim and they're just like, all right, you're gonna run around the building and set this up, and then he just goes off comms.
They had with that, because they had the invisible guy. They're like, you go stand behind the guy holding someone hostage while invisible. I'm gonna distract him by blowing up a bunch of cars in the supermarket, and then you'll grab him. And then, like, he blows up the cars, and he doesn't grab them, and he's like, what's happening? Where's Chad? I'm like, well, you blew up a bunch of cars. It's possible he got hit by something. There's shrapnel going everywhere, and he's invisible, so...
Which it's then funny that they got in trouble for blowing up those cars during the simulation.
Yeah.
I'm just like, why? Why are they getting in trouble for that? That's what you would do. That would be the fallout from a fight with superpowers.
My question is not why did they get in trouble. My question is, how has this not happened before?
How have cars not blown up before?
How, yeah. They're like, I can't believe it would be so irresponsible. I'm like, you're literally giving middle schoolers with superpowers free reign over the city to use those untested, unskilled powers. That was one of the things that I remember I wrote down in big caps where they were like, yeah, we did the Super Sim since ancient times, but then in 1980, some kid died and we had to stop it. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You've been having kids with superpowers fight each other for 1,000 years, and the first time someone died was 1980? The first time? Like, kids kill each other with fucking lawn darts, are you kidding me? Like, how is this not the most dangerous event that has ever been allowed? Like, that's like telling the police, like, okay, to train, we're gonna shut down part of the town. People are going to pretend to be criminals. You're still going to have your guns, live fire, tasers, everything. And you're going to go out and actually fight these crimes, fight these people, arrest. Like, we want you to make people bloody. Like, everyone's going to resist as though this was a real situation. And I'm like, what? No. Why would you do that?
And wasn't that death one of your nitpicks too? Like, the Super Sim death, it shut it all down because it was like a guy flying hit another person who was flying, and they like fell and died.
They fell. Yeah, and I was like, 2 airplanes hit each other. They come out of the sky because they're only flying due to forward momentum. 2 birds hit each other. They fall out of the sky because they need to flap their wings. In this, the guy's just floating there. Like, he doesn't have to do anything physical to keep himself moving. It's all just, can I focus? And then someone runs into him, someone that he can see, because that guy's not blind, and he tumbles out of the sky. It's like, why don't you just keep flying? Like,
yeah, because you see that in Superman, with the animated stuff. Like, they'll get in a fight, and they'll, like, punch Superman, and he doesn't fall out of the sky, he just, like, flies backwards, and then stops, and then flies back forwards. Yeah. Like, he doesn't just, like, get punched in the face, and then just fall to the ground because he forgets how to fly.
Yeah, and I like that it was oddly specific where they're like, yeah, it was the only time someone ever died, it was because we let a blind superhero, he could fly. He took to the sky and couldn't see where he was going and ran into another flying superhero. They both tumbled 4 stories and died. It's like specifically for blind people. But then Philip and his friends do the Super Sim and he blows up all the cars, and then Donnie comes running at super speed and trips over passed out invisible Chad and goes rocketing into people, and they're like, no, we can't let you do this. And I'm like, that had nothing to do with their disabilities. That literally any superhero kid could have done that. Like,
well, and you find out later Chad wasn't passed out, like he had sabotaged it. And
yeah, every part of, like, I have to keep pausing because every part of it doesn't make sense. It's like, why are you having kids doing the Super Sim? How has this never happened before? Why are they banned because of their disabilities, even though their disabilities didn't cause this? How did Chad know where to kneel in front of the guy who's moving 200 miles per hour? Like, fuck, did he dive in front of that?
Maybe.
And then they're like, Donnie's sitting in the ICU for like 2 weeks, and the guy he plowed into because he tripped going 200 miles per hour. It's a surprise anyone survived. But they're like, oh yeah, they're in the hospital for like weeks at a time, and I'm like, aren't there any superheroes with like healing powers?
There are. There are.
Yeah, and then they kill Finch, and then a healer comes over and heals him. Yeah. And it's like, where was that when Donnie was slain in the ICU with like 80 broken bones?
They don't go and explain that, though. They do like slip the line in there. They're like, healers are one of the
very rare.
They're like the rarest superpower, people that can heal.
They're very rare, but you have teleporters. It doesn't matter how fucking rare they are. You can get there from anywhere in the world at an instant. Yeah. You have a network of instant communication and instant teleportation. You just bring them in, have them they heal Finch. Finch gets like slammed against a wall 10 times. He's 90 years old and he's already been ripped in half. He's got like every broken bone. The guy heals him in like 8 seconds. Yeah. You're telling me they couldn't get a healer to come over from Dubai and spend 8 seconds making Donnie feel better? Like, they're very rare. There's one. There's one, and Finch has them. So fuck.
I'll give you that one. I'll give you that ding on world building. I'll give you that one.
I got. Now I'm just on the dings, I guess. I've already hit half of them.
Yeah.
Let me just look through this. Bentley's dad is rich. Why? How do the heroes make money? Why would someone? I guess, yeah, we've already talked about why do the heroes, how do they make money? But then it's like, specifically, why is Bentley's dad rich? They're like, oh, he's on the council. Like, why do you pay the council more? What special training do they have to sit on the superhero console that other superheroes don't have?
I don't know, that's the same thing I mentioned earlier with Harry Potter. Like, why are the Weasleys dirt poor, but the Malfoys rich? You know, like,
Yeah.
why does, because, I thought Lucius Malfoy was on part of the Ministry of Magic too, but I could be wrong. But it's like, why do these people get more money and not others? Are the Weasleys dirt poor just because they have 15 kids?
Probably. They're supposed to be Irish.
Don't they get wizard tax deductions to keep all that money?
So let's see. Why did the falling hero fall out of the sky when someone ran into them? How do teleporters know that someone isn't standing where they're going to teleport to if they teleport like across the country?
Yeah, weren't you telling me about this before? Like, the superheroes like teleport and they like come above the ground so they don't teleport and like materialize in the grass or something.
Yeah, that's in Wheel of Time. They can sort of teleport across continents, or not continent, like from country to country. They do it by making like a doorway in the air that they walk through, like a doorway between places. But they make a point of like, that doorway appears and there's a rock there, it cuts into the rock. At one point, a villain actually opens a doorway on top of someone to cut them in half, like as a weapon. And so when the heroes use that ability, he either, if he's going like between the palaces, he has a room set aside and he's like, no one ever go in this room. No maids, nothing. I don't want it cleaned. Stay out of this room, because if I come in and someone's there, they're going to get killed. Or if he's going somewhere he's never been before, like a town or a farm or something, he makes sure he ports somewhere that's like out in the middle of a field and like a foot off the ground to make sure he's not going to run into someone. But here they're like, his mom just goes to the beach, and I'm like, I'm good thing no one parked a truck there. You have no way of knowing.
True.
And again, this is one of those things, like, they don't have to spend a paragraph explaining it, but I was really curious. I would have liked to know how this worked. How do they know where they're going?
They kind of explain it the same way they do in X-Men, because you've got, like Nightcrawler and other teleporting mutants. I'm sure there are others.
I thought Nightcrawler specifically had to be able to see where he was going.
Well, and
that's his.
And that's what I was gonna say. Like, that's the shtick he puts in there. Like it depends on the book you read, because comics. That's the thing with like Marvel and DC. Like, they have a million different universes with slightly different rules and whatnot in them. There's not one like Marvel timeline in comics, but some will say Nightcrawler has to specifically see where he's going. Other times they'll say he has to see or know where he's going. And that was sort of the route they took with the teleporters in this one. It was like, you either see where you're going or you describe it, because that was how they got
the blind teleporter.
The blind teleporter.
Describe everything to him.
They could they described Central Park in detail, and he was able to teleport them into Central Park.
Yeah. It's just one of those things. It's like, knowing geographically where Central Park is and what it looks like is fine. I could understand that he would teleport there, but it's just like, you don't know where every jogger is. You don't know where every tree is. Like, how do you know you're not going to teleport your friend?
I guess it's suspension of disbelief. Like,
yeah.
there fundamentally has to be when you're talking about stuff like superheroes, and that's just one of those things you just kind of have to accept. Like, yeah, maybe you'll teleport, and even in Star Trek, they did that to some degree, where they're like, well, what's to keep us from teleporting into solid rock? We can't teleport that deep into the planet.
Yeah.
You just kind of have
scan stuff.
You just have to have suspension of disbelief and just be like, okay, yeah, you just, it's okay to beam down into this room, because there's not going to be like a dog sitting there.
Yeah. I assume they scan in like Star Trek and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where it's like, you have kids superheroes learning their powers, or it wouldn't have taken much time, and it would have been interesting to just be like, James, aren't you worried about teleporting into something? And he would be like, oh no, if I try to teleport like inside of a tree or inside of a person, my body just won't go. It's like trying to stick your hand through a wall. You can't go there. Or just be like, oh, if I tried to do that, I would slide slightly to the left until I came into an open space.
That's fair. Yeah, you could just say like, well, yeah, even superpowers have to give way to physics, two solid objects. That's fair. Like, yeah, I'll grant you that ding.
Okay, how do blockers work? I guess that's another thing. Well, this is kind of pedantic, I guess. I just find it weird that, like, you know, the no power zone power can turn off, like, super intelligence and super strength. It's like, do both of those have the same source of power?
That's not too unusual. Like, even in the comic books, like, in the X-Men, there's the mutant in the third movie, I think they don't mention his name in the movie,
yeah,
but in
the
comics,
third
it's Leech.
movie was pretty terrible.
Well, but what I'm saying is he's a character from the comics. They just didn't name drop him in the movie. But the character Leech, I think, is his name. He can shut down power. So there's...
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that outlandish. It's already been done, you know. Simpsons did it. X-Men did it.
Yeah, I guess. I didn't like it there.
It would stand to reason that if there's an infinite amount of powers, that one of those powers would be the power to cancel other powers.
Somewhat. Again, it's just weird that, like, all powers get lumped together the same. Like, I could understand if you had a power that stops someone from, like, running past, like, 60 miles per hour, where it's like, okay, this is faster than human. But it's like, Bentley's just, like, as smart as an adult as a kid. Like, there's nothing about him that's superhuman at the moment, really. He's just, like, somewhat smart. But they specifically have a point where they're like, oh, I'm under a no power zone, I can't figure out a solution to this problem.
Yeah, so you're like saying that, like, there should be a line where, like, because of his super intelligence, he can calculate pi to 1,000,000 digits, but regular intelligence, he can remember 6.
If that's how the intelligence works. I'm just saying, like, I feel as though mental powers probably wouldn't be affected by a no power zone.
That's fair. It's sort of the same. I've seen this meme with Overwatch where, you've got the character Sombra who hacks people and their abilities don't go off when they're hacked. And McCree, the cowboy, has the ability to just roll. And people are like, so when he's hacked, he just forgets how to roll?
He forgets how to roll, exactly. That we could forget. That's a funny quirk of a video game. This is just more like, it's just awfully convenient that a power just happens to, like, stop all powers. Or here's another, like, you can be really, really strong. How much of that is super strength? Like, if you work out in the gym and then a no power zone guy goes on you, like, how much can you lift now? It seems weird that you could turn off, like, the super part of his muscles but without, like, removing his muscles entirely.
And then, like, what happens if you're, like, picking up a car when that happens? Do you just die because the car now lands on top of you?
The car, I don't know. Let's see here. Yeah, this is a nitpick. If heroes have been around since ancient times, how come, like, Henry is the first person to ever be like, what if I use telepathy to talk to people instead of just reading their minds? And they act like this is, like, a big, like, no one has ever thought of this. But it's like, he went to Halloween as Professor X, who talks to people in their minds. Like, you should know this. At first, it was really weird because the way they present it and in the moment, it seems like this, like, hey, you can take ideas out of people's heads. Why don't you put ideas in? You could put the vision of what you're seeing into Philip's head, and then he could see. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of unique. And then they mentioned Professor X. It's like, wait, no, that's just telepathy. He could show people visions and shit. You should know that. Someone should have discovered this long ago. The first thing that Philip's dad should have done is be like, you're a superhero, you have telekinesis. By the way, here's your new buddy Henry. He's going to be your seeing eye friend. And that would have built up this better relationship. It would have explained why the kid in the wheelchair is in the disabled class with the blind kid. Because maybe they pair these people up specifically to help them in that way. I don't know.
Yeah. Would you ding it the same way for the last, like, line in the story where Bentley's like, well, wait, Philip, if you can move things with your mind, why can't you just move yourself and fly?
Yeah, a little bit.
Like, why has nobody thought of that? Like, if you're telekinetic, why can't you just move yourself and become a flyer?
Exactly. I was like, yeah, that's how Static Shock got around. They're like, oh, you can lift up metal stuff? What if you put something metal underneath you and move it? Now you can fly.
That's how Magneto flies half the time. He just floats around on a metal disc like Static.
Yeah, have you heard, what was it? Apparently Superman doesn't actually have super strength. He has tactile telekinesis. Have you heard that?
I have not heard that theory, but I can see where they're gonna go with that.
It explains why he can like pick up a car by its bumper and like have it stand up, because they're like, if you picked up a car like that, it would just bend around you because the forces would all be on the bumper. Or like if you tried to stop a train by pushing into the front of it, you would just push all the cars like back into it. They're like, that's not how physics work. They're like, no, you have telekinesis. You can move the whole train at once, but you have to touch it for it to work. It's tactile telekinesis. But he is still super strong because he can punch people and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where it's like, that's why the world building fails for me. Because it feels like all these kids are like, hey, you know what would be neat if you could use this? And I'm like, yeah, someone should have thought of that a long time ago. And the fact that they didn't kind of proves that you haven't thought about what it would be like if these superheroes were in ancient Rome or like going through the Renaissance or in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Like, it's almost as though, like, no one thought about that until now. No one was experimenting with powers until you kids came along.
Intelligent thought was forbidden.
Yeah. Let's see here.
You want to nitpick the Braille comic book?
I actually didn't want to nitpick it because it's so dumb, though. That's like the first point here where I like knew this wasn't going to be a good book, at least for me, because Philip talks about like how much he loves superheroes, and he's like, I even found a few Braille comic books, and I was like, huh, I didn't know Braille comic books exist. That's interesting. I'm gonna go Google them. It turns out Braille comic books don't exist. Or rather, there's one that exists, but it's like an experiment. It's not like Spider-Man. It's like an art project that someone made where you could like feel, it's like two dots moving together, and he tried to tell a story with just sensation. Philip talks about reading the issue of Batman where Jason Todd gets killed by the Joker, and they're like, it's in Braille. And I'm like, what? Why? That doesn't exist. Did you not do any research on blind people? Like, at all? Why would you just invent something? Like, I don't know if he assumed they exist or he, like, knew they're fake and made it up for the story. But it's like, I feel as though if you're making a story about disabled people, you should try to educate people at least a little bit about disabled people. And instead, he's making stuff up that might give people the wrong impression about what exists and what doesn't exist. Because and I pointed this out to you as well, where I was like, you know what he could have done is just had him, like, watch superhero movies. Because blind people do still go to the movies. There's actually a blind movie reviewer on YouTube. You could check him out. Who watched The Amazing Spider-Man. I think that's his most popular video. Or, you know, you could have his dad read the comic books to him. Or you could just have, like, his brother or something. There's a lot of different ways you could have gone without inventing Braille comic books.
Maybe, but I don't ding that one really at all, because I'm just like, you're gonna nitpick a Braille comic book in a book about, like, superheroes. Like, okay. You say, well, Braille comic books aren't real. It's like, neither are superheroes and superpowers.
Yeah, but I mean, like, blind people are real, and he still treats them...
They are?
Like, I guess they are. Yeah, I guess that's the point. He doesn't really treat them like a real blind person. There's other parts in here, too. Like, he eventually gained sight through Henry in the way we described earlier. Mm-hmm. And there's, I didn't write down the page, but I have it marked where, like, Henry takes him out and they're walking around and he talks about, like, reading a sign. And he's like, how would Philip know how to read English letters? He's never seen one before.
That's a good point.
And Braille, if you don't know, and this is what I actually looked up, Braille is phonetic. It's not based on, like, the English alphabet. So, like, they have a k sound, and it's the same regardless of spelling. So, writing Braille is actually different. They actually combine a lot of, like, sounds and stuff, too. Because Braille paper, it's thicker, it's heavier, because it has to be textured and everything. So, oftentimes, they'll try to convey more in less so that they don't have to have the books be these huge, like, 3-foot thick things. So it's like, it's a completely different language, almost. You're saying the same stuff, but it like, he wouldn't be able to read. Okay, there's one last one. We're already past our time, but there's well, I guess you have a different version of the book. That's sad. I put like specifically like page numbers for where there's like huge glaring typos. Or I guess they're not a typo, it's like a formatting error. Like on page 264, the book is split into like 4 parts based on the seasons.
Okay, yeah, my book still has that typo.
Your book has that too. They didn't fix it.
Are you talking about the one where it's like his mom dies and it just goes part 4 spring the Ables?
Yeah, in the regular font, and all the other parts it's like a separate page that's just blank and says the part name on it.
Yeah.
And it's like, nope, they just
that.
No one caught that part. They just wrote part 4 underneath in the regular text and went to the same chapter. So there's that. And then probably the biggest continuity error, and definitely worth digging, page 311. And I'm actually going to read this part and see if you notice it. We had to walk all the way around. I guess I should give a little bit of setup. This is where Chad and Henry and Philip are trying to sneak into the school.
Mm-hmm.
And Chad's power, if you don't know, is invisibility. So we had to walk all the way around the interior fence line to the other side of the yard to find a gate in the fence we could push Henry's wheelchair through. But after that, the terrain before us was all grass. Chad turned on his invisibility as soon as we closed the gate behind us. Slapping a hand on each of our shoulders, he turned Henry and me invisible too. It was maybe the 9th or 10th time I'd see him do it, and it never got any less cool.
Yeah, I caught that too. He doesn't have 2 hands.
He only has 1 arm! That's like his defining feature. And he puts a hand on both of their shoulders for the climactic turn invisible and walk through the people. I'm like, why would you... You forgot.
I caught that too when I read that. I was like, wait a minute.
Chad doesn't have 2 arms. Like, you could have just made it so that invisible people don't have to touch things to make them invisible. They could, like, generate a field or something. I don't know.
Which is exactly how the no power people do it. They project a field. They don't have to touch the mutant that they're, suppressing.
Or just like, I'm going to touch Philip's shoulder and Philip is going to push Henry in the wheelchair.
Yeah, and just daisy chain it.
Yeah, daisy chain invisibility. Now I'm curious. Like, Chad, if you touch the ground, can you turn the whole world invisible? How big can you go? Can you, like, spread it around? Like, how far deep can we... I'm so curious about the... I think that's the biggest thing about it. I've said that several times here, but you talk about, like, this is a fun story about the characters learning to use their powers, but there's never any, like, cool scenes or funny scenes where they're, like, experimenting with their powers or doing cool, fun stuff with their powers, or asking these kinds of, like, unique questions that kids would. They come up with the stuff that, like, anyone would have thought of, like, 1,000,000 years ago, but they don't think of anything that, like, really goofy or crazy.
Well, except for, like, the one at the beginning when Philip learns his mom's a teleporter, he asks if he could teleport an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
And she's like, I guess if I had to, sure.
It's like, I see. So you could move, like, thousands of pounds of grain to underdeveloped countries instead of burning it, but...
I see you could conjure diamonds out of the sun and pour them to Earth.
Like, there are ramifications to these powers you people aren't realizing. She's like, I never thought about how much I could teleport before. I'm sure that might be useful in some way. Whatever. I'll just teleport individuals back and forth. No need to worry about how we could create some sort of utopia by moving massive amount of things and get rid of the whole transportation industry. Why does anyone even have a car? Instant teleporters. She should be the richest one in town. Fuck Bentley's dad.
Yeah.
She could literally just pop back and forth to every person in town and be like, hey, how's it going? Good morning. Where you want to go? To the school? Voop, voop. Okay, off to Johnny's house. Voop. Oh, where do you need to go? The store? Voop, voop. Like, you have instant teleportation. Society should be vastly different. But yeah, thanks for listening to my TED Talk. These are the things going through my mind as I was reading this book. And again, it's not completely terrible. I didn't, like, hate it utterly. I just didn't find anything. The only things I could find to talk about were the nitpicks. There was nothing, like, cool about it. Oh, I'll let you have the last word, though. Did you have anything?
I don't know. I didn't really prepare a closing statement, Your Honor. I don't know. I overall felt it was a good book, and it's not the masterpiece of literature. No, and like there were the glaring, like the one where he puts a hand on each shoulder. Like I read that, and I was like, I don't know if Jeremy, when he writes this, is envisioning Chad as putting a hand on each shoulder, or if he just means like he put a hand between our shoulders and like bridged the gap with his finger and thumb, and that made it work. But
weird.
But yeah, and he just phrased his sentence weird. But yeah, I definitely got that plot hole there, that continuity. But overall, I thought it was good. I mean, I don't go into books necessarily looking to analyze them. I just read it, and yeah, I don't necessarily go into it expecting to come out with a moral lesson and a moral story. Like, I'm not reading a book. If I want a moral lesson, I'll just watch VeggieTales,
Hey. I've never seen VeggieTales. I wouldn't know.
You've never seen any VeggieTales?
No, it wasn't really.
I mean, it's anthropomorphic vegetables teach you Bible lessons, basically.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was never really big on that Bibble as a kid.
The Brobel.
I was no Bibble. Yeah, Brobel. Yeah, that's that. Now that I think about it, having you on a literature podcast when you're like, I don't really read books to analyze them.
Yeah, like. I'm not. Well, that's why you got Brandon for most of your videos.
I'm curious to know what you people in the chat think, because on the one hand, yeah, that does seem kind of counterintuitive, but on the other hand, I feel like it's an interesting perspective to have someone who just reads for fun, and then to have me who's more analytical, and then there's this contrast between the two of us. So let us know in the comments if you like that, if you'd like to see more Bard Breaker on here. I'm sure you'd be willing to read more stuff if I forced you to, right?
You mean if you paid me to?
Same thing.
Yeah, no,
there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, people.
I'm totally down to do more. Like I said, like I like reading. If it's a decent story, I'll read through it. Even if it's not a decent story, I mean, I plowed through Teresa.
So yeah, we'll see. Maybe we can get you something a little bit better. Maybe we could have you. Are you interested in reading a comic book? We usually do comic books for December.
Yeah, I could pick up a graphic novel or a comic book and read it. Sure.
Okay. Either way, thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe if you sat through this whole thing. Assuming you're watching this on YouTube. If you're watching this on Spotify or iTunes, I don't know what people. I don't use either of those. Do you like or?
I think you give ratings on iTunes.
Yeah.
I've actually never listened to a podcast ever.
Yeah, I've listened to them, but only on YouTube. So I guess give us a rating or let us know what we should ask people to do. Send me an email. And I have a Patreon too for this channel. I also have several other channels. I do Hardleg Gaming, which is my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. I have Legs Play, which is like a Let's Play channel. I have Hardleg Music. And of course, Bard Breaker has his channel, although that's not really related to the Patreon. But I have a Patreon. If you like this, you could donate $1, get on the Discord. You could talk about the books we're reading. Help us decide the books we're reading. Because we actually had a poll this time. Next month, we're going to be doing some horror books for October, since that's the spooky month. And it looks like, according to this poll, the winner was Stephen King's short stories. We did Lovecraft Nat last year, so this year we're going to be running a bunch of Stephen King stuff with hopefully MBT if he's available. If not, I'll find someone else. I know you don't like spooky stuff, Bard.
I'm learning. It's like Ethan's bread and butter, so I've had to broaden my palate a little bit.
Ah, I see. Yeah, so we'll see. Someone will join me either way. So look forward to that. If you're interested, I'll be on Twitter, or I might put it in the comments of this video, or I'll definitely put it on the Patreon Discord. I'll say exactly what stories we pick out, which ones we read, and you can join in and leave questions, discussion topics for us to bring up when we finished. Either way, I think that's it for now. Bard Breaker, thanks for joining me.
It's been a real pleasure. It's been a great 30 years discussing this with you.
Sure. And until next time, have a able day.
Yes.
If you're able to.